This is section 3.3, part 1. We're going to talk about real zeros and polynomials. So zeros. You also know them as x-intercepts. Or it's where the graph crosses the x-axis. Okay. First thing I want to talk about is what's called rational zeros theorem. Now this thing doesn't necessarily tell you what is a zero, but it gives you a choice of things to check out. Well, what this is, if you have a polynomial, it's in the form of a x sub n plus b x sub n minus 1 plus dot 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 plus c. What you're interested in looking at is this constant term out here, the one with no x, and the coefficient of the term that has the highest power. We're looking at p are going to be our factors of the constant term, which is this guy, and q are our factors of coefficient of highest power. Which are factors of that number right there. And these things show up in the form of rational zeros are going to be plus or minus some factor of p over some factor of q. Let's take a look at an example. A polynomial, x cubed plus 3x squared minus 4. So the first thing I do is always take a look and see if it's a quadratic. It's not, it's a higher order. If it's quadratic, you try to factor it and put it into quadratic formula. This is a cubic, so the next thing I want to look and see if I can factor an x out. You're not having x over here, so I can't do that. So if you can't do one of those two, then you come back in, and we're going to take a look at possible rational zeros and how you figure out what those are. Okay, so we need to find, first of all, factors of -4. Those are going to be my p's. They're my factors of -4, which are going to be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, and plus or minus 4. Those are the only things that will multiply together to get you 4. 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. Okay, q. Q is the number in front of here, which is 1. It's understood. So factors of 1 are going to be plus or minus 1. So note these are going to take the form of p plus or minus p over q. So I'm going to start with this one. So I'm going to have 1 over 1, which is 1. Then I'm going to go to this one, plus or minus 2 over plus or minus 1, which is going to be plus or minus 2. And then the last one I got then will be this one over that, which will be plus or minus 4 over plus or minus 1, which is plus or minus 4. So there are my possible rational zeros. So the question is, how do you find out which ones really are zeros? And what you do is you pick one of these and you use synthetic division. So let's just pick a number, and just out of curiosity, I'll start with -1. I want to see if that is a root. So I'm going to put -1 in. And then we write out the coefficients of our polynomial. If you remember, our polynomial was x cubed plus 3x squared minus 4. You notice I'm missing my x term. So I'm going to have 1, 3, which is the coefficient of this one, 0, which is my x term, and minus 4. Remember, do synthetic, you bring the 1 down, I multiply these two, add them, gives me 2. -2. So -1 or -2. 1 times -2 gives me 2. Okay, because this is not 0, it's not a root. Okay, so -1 did not work. So the next thing to do then is to go on to 1. That's a nice next step. I've used 1, 3, 0, and -4. Times 1 is 1, gives me 4. It gives me 4. 1 times 4 is 4, that gives me 0. So this tells me then is x equals 1 is a 0, because my remainder is 0. Not only that now, but we've got our quadratic down here. Our new quadratic now is x squared plus 4x plus 4. Find zeros, we set that equal to 0. Okay, well this thing factors. It's x plus 2 times x plus 2. So my other root is x equals a -2. Once you get down to quadratic, you probably don't want to continue on with this. So my roots, or my zeros, excuse me, are going to be x equals -1 and x equals 1 and x equals 2. Those are my zeros. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Let's deal with 4x cubed plus 4x squared minus x minus 1. And for zeros, that's going to be set equal to 0. Okay, there's my p. And factors of that are going to be plus or minus 1. There's my q. I need factors of 4. Be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4. So our possible rational roots then will be p over each one of these. So it will be 1 over 1, plus or minus 1. Then I will have 1 over 2, so plus or minus 1/2. And I've got 1 over 4. So those are my possible rational zeros. All right, so what I'm going to do here again is start out and pick one of these, and I'm hoping, so I'm dealing with a cubic, and again, I can't factor out because of this. I'm hoping that I can pick that it's either going to be one of these so I don't have to mess with the fractions. So what I'm going to do is try -1, and I'll use synthetic, and I'm going to have 4, 4, -1, -1, my coefficients. I bring this one down, times 4, that gives me -4, that gives me 0. -1 times -1 gives me 1. So that tells me right there that -1 is a 0. So x equals -1 is a 0. All right, and this is my resultant polynomial, which will be 4x squared. My x term is 0, minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to solve this. Because I've just got an x squared term, I'm going to move that over. X squared is 1/4. Or x will be, and then you take the square root of top and bottom, plus or minus 1/2. And there are my other two roots. So our zeros on this one are going to be -1 and then plus and minus 1/2. And if you remember, this was a possible rational root, and we found it by solving our quadratic rather than having to do the synthetic on this. Okay. So the last technique we want to talk about, and this sometimes works, but it can be kind of a pain. But let's deal with the same one we just did, which is 4x cubed plus 4x squared minus x minus 1. Then we're going to do what's called grouping. And here what we do is I tend to start with these two. I'm going to put these in a group, and I'm going to put this in a group. So I'm going to have a group of 4x squared, x cubed plus 4x squared. And what I'm going to do is factor something out, which will be a 4x squared. That's the biggest thing I take out. That will leave me an x here plus 1 from this term. And I'm going to have a minus. When I take a minus out of here, I end up with an x plus 1. Now you may not think we've accomplished something, but notice I've got an x plus 1 here and an x plus 1 there. So I'm going to factor it out. So what I've got left here is going to be 4x squared minus 1 equals 0. So now I've got two products. I set each one equal to 0. I have x plus 1 equals 0, and 4x squared minus 1 equals 0. This gives me x equals -1. These are the roots we got before. 4x squared equals 1. X is plus or minus 1/2, which are the same ones we got before. So the trick to grouping is to pick a group, try something, and the whole point here is we're trying to get something in common in both of these that we can factor out. So I end up with two products, which are easy then to find equal to 0 because you set each one of these equal to 0. And that will be the first part of real zeros of polynomial homework that you will do.